Okay, great. Everyone, let's kick off. So this is our third session of the day. These are our sort of recommendation panel sessions. We're doing them around four key COP themes which were voted for by the young leaders in this project. And this one is specifically on nature, land use and oceans. So we've got some different experts on the panel who are going to respond or sort of reflect on, give comments on, share their expertise on the recommendations that Zena's going to share with us, who is one of our young leaders. So maybe we could start off by doing like a little bit of introduction. Oh, so many tabs open. Where is my slide? Okay, yeah, here's the agenda. So overview of the campaign, I'll quickly explain what we've been doing. Sorry to everyone young leaders who already know this back front, but lots of people don't. So then we'll do instructions, then we're gonna go through some of the recommendations, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So that's where you can ask your questions to the experts. Tabs. Okay, so yeah, many of you already know this, but over the last couple of months, we've been running our campaign that's called Unite for UK Climate Action, and within that, we've got our young leaders from around the country. The aim of this was to bring together a group of the young leaders who are volunteering to help us create a systems map of the UK climate policy sort of landscape as it stands, using the One Planet platform, which is a systems mapping tool, amongst other things. And we wanted to provide a sort of national picture of what each local government was doing, not only to reduce carbon emissions towards net zero and also adapt to climate change, but also looking across health, nature, equity, things like that. So the systems map helps to identify best practice and understand where there are gaps and what opportunities there are to develop actions further, delivering co-benefits around health, nature recovery and equity. We've worked collaboratively with the young leaders to form these recommendations, which we feel local governments should be implementing to amplify their impact in response to the climate crisis. So ultimately, I hope this piece of work is going to encourage local councils, businesses and communities to work together to create and deliver effective joined up solutions. So maybe we could do some introductions. So Gemma, you're first on my screen, so maybe you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. So hey everyone, my name is Gemma Sargent and I am a marine biologist and the marine science officer for an ocean charity called Ocean Generation. And my job essentially is to translate complex ocean science into content which is engaging and accessible for everyone, even if you don't have a background in science. And we promote our work through science and storytelling, comms pieces on our social media, and we also run three youth programs for ages of 3 all the way up to 25 to introduce people to the ocean and the threats that it faces, and empower them to make a difference for the ocean in their everyday lives, no matter what kind of career path they are headed on. Yeah, really excited to be invited here today to reflect and give some kind of thoughts on the amazing work that the young leaders have been doing. So yeah, looking forward to hearing some of the ideas.
Thank you. Same, honestly, to the discussion. Jenna, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Jenna Azamara Andrews. I am a master's graduate from Imperial. I just finished my environmental technology degree, which focused on combining science with policy and bridging the gap between information and implementation. And I am a specialist in also marine biology. So I work a lot with marine plastics. Currently trying to pursue a PhD in the management of marine plastics with Imperial again. So that's my background and that's my specialty. And I've really enjoyed working with One Planet the last couple of months, and it's a great team. So I'm looking forward to showing you the results of the research we've been doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Fairbrother. I'm the strategy lead at the South Downs National Park Authority. I lead on their climate change and net zero program. I also do a lot of work around adaptation planning, particularly producing our adaptation plan, action plan, which we're due to update next year. Part of my time, I also work as a convener for the UK National Parks Climate Change Group, and that is seeking to coordinate activity across all of the UK national parks on climate change and net zero. So we share best practice, and we seek to work together on that. I'm also very excited to hear about what the young leaders have been doing. I think a lot of the recommendations that I've seen thus far are very relevant to the national parks, and we're very keen to be taking a bit of a leadership role around climate action and just transition.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, last but not least, Tony, to introduce us.
Hello there. Yes, my name's Tony Whitbread. Background, I'm president of the Sussex Wildlife Trust at the moment. Took early retirement from them after working there for 27 years. Background, I'm basically a woodland ecologist, a forest ecologist, I suppose. So at the moment, I'm also doing quite a lot of work with NEP and rewilding and that sort of thing. Various other things going on, like I chair the South East Climate Alliance and so on. Again, very interested in seeing what's going to come out of today.
Thanks. Okay, great. So let's just jump right in with our recommendations. Jenna, over to you.
Hi, so I'm going to be presenting the results of the research that we've gathered from looking at the COP28 lens of nature, land use, and oceans through our analysis of the UK climate strategies. And out of what we've seen, there have been 5 major. I'll go through the layout of what I'll be showing you first. I'm going to be presenting different outcomes that we've identified that are common themes across the different councils, and then I'll be showing you what actions that the team at One Planet thinks we could be implementing across different councils. So this is taking strengths from climate strategy plans we've seen and implementing them in spaces where there might have been gaps in other strategy plans. Or say one council has a great idea. For example, I know that Glasgow is doing pretty well when it comes to plastic reduction research, and we could try and share this around the councils rather than it going by over our shoulders unseen. And then finally, I'll be saying what the indicators of these outcomes could be. So these are going to be qualitative or quantitative measurements, ways we can prove that what we're doing or what the councils are trying to achieve is actually working. So for nature, land use, and oceans, there are 5 main themes that we think should be implemented universally across the different councils. And these are access to quality nature for all, banning and reducing plastic pollution, implementing regenerative land practices, and also 2 branches of trying to implement more nature-based solutions, which are both for climate change action and also for mitigation and adaptation. Also, I'm going to just cut in quickly here. I do sometimes have a stutter, so please excuse me if that comes out during this presentation. It does happen a bit more when I'm on camera, which is really annoying. So access to quality nature for all is the first outcome I'm going to speak about. And this one in particular has many different positives because it's proven that the more that people are exposed to nature, the more they seem to care about it. And also the more you can see what's happening in front of you with regards to climate change and the crisis that we're in, the more likelihood it is that people will actually want to care about it and want to make changes themselves. It's also a matter of equity. It's also known that households with higher incomes are more likely to have access to quality nature than people with lower incomes, and that is an issue you can see quite blandly in a place like London, where a lot of nicer, more expensive neighborhoods will have lovely green spaces and maintain really well, and then neighborhoods that are made up of lower income households don't have that access. So it also creates a kind of divide, a social divide, which isn't very good. And between the actions that we think could be taken, I'm going to talk about them in matters of council, business, schools, and community. So councils could ensure that quality nature is provided by prioritizing nature in the structure of their communities. And this would also tie in well with the nature-based solutions aspect, because a lot of nature-based solutions are literally just inputting green spaces and nature into grey spaces, so like streets and highly populated areas, and these can have multiple benefits. So we would like to improve the overall accessibility of green spaces, trees and woodland areas in the district. This would also include council action like to achieve this would also include increasing accessibility of natural spaces outside of their town, so collaborating with transport businesses to be able to make it more accessible to move into green spaces if you want to go and experience them as well. For business action, we want the councils to encourage businesses to increase the provision and functionality of green spaces in their sites, and also increase the accessibility of that to their employees. So I'm going to use London as an example a lot, just because I live here and it's what I see every day. So I have probably more experience speaking about that. But increasing access of it to their employees. So in highly dense populated areas, you could include green spaces on roofs, or introduce, sorry, excuse the honking, or for example, create more avenues where we otherwise just have streets. So people going about their daily lives are just naturally exposed to it, as opposed to having to seek it out themselves, which not everyone has the time or money or can give the effort for.
Okay, that was a lot of information. So I'm going to cut in and get some,
All right, go.
some feedback, and then we can come back. That was really good. Does anyone on the panel want to comment maybe about challenges, what you're trying to do, what the council's doing? Yeah, Chris?
Hi there, Tash. I mean, this element of the work did resonate with me particularly strongly. The national parks, I think, are places that, at least in principle, should be for everybody. We have a national profile. We want to be accessible, but I think we are aware that in many cases we're dealing with the usual constituency of user groups. We are developing a program called National Parks for All, which is looking at these issues around social and economic and other barriers to access, cultural barriers as well. You know, understanding that not everyone has a high degree of countryside literacy or necessarily understands these sort of unwritten rules of the countryside, the countryside code, etc. And we're starting to engage more with schools through our engagement and outreach program. But I think this does seem to me an area where the national parks have a strong role. So I thought, you know, the suggestion around policy development and indicators was valuable. I just wanted to highlight that there is an existing access to natural green space standard, which was a national sort of indicator that was developed by Natural England. A lot of protected landscapes, national parks particularly, have an idea of where they are in terms of that indicator, i.e. they have an understanding if we have a paucity of natural accessible green space close to areas of population. So it gives us a sense of where we might target new green spaces so that they're, you know, we address those shortcomings. But it certainly seemed to me a good area of policy development, certainly very relevant to us.
That'd be really interesting if there's any resources that you could pop in the chat or links. That would be really cool to have a look at. Yeah, Tony, and then Gemma.
Yeah, just a quick thought. I mean, that's great. There's a lot in there, and I can see how you're trying to pitch it at the right strategic level. One concept which I think you did bring out, but I want to highlight as well, is actually councils and businesses, particularly councils, using their ability to influence. So it's not just about delivering access on land they own or have direct control over, but it's actually working with other people. I think something like 70% of our countryside is actually farmed. And so I think the tie-up between the idea of, you know, increasing green space and a discussion with farmers and landowners is very important. It's not a matter of just persuading them, it's a matter of actually having the policy background right, the ability to actually support farmers who want to open up their land more. So it's all those sorts of things. So looking at the big area where access could be enhanced, and that is inherently about people like councils talking to landowners.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And just to mention, we're going to be using these sort of area like ideas that the experts or the panel are sharing with us to enhance our recommendations to strengthen them. So thank you for that. There's lots of things, we're not the experts, so there's lots of things that we need to add in. That's what this panel session's for. Gemma, I don't know, I guess you might have something interesting to say about online access to...
Yeah, yeah. I love this one. I think I love the fact that you have focused a lot on inclusion and equity of like access to these spaces. I think that's super important to kind of keep in mind. And one thing I maybe did want to highlight, and it's just like some research I have done previously in like the role that I'm in at the moment, is there's actually been a lot of research on blue health as well at the moment, and it's been linked to um, sort of the rapid growth of mental health disorders has been linked to like the lack of human nature interactions. And there's been studies on kind of how our oceans and our kind of local water sources as well can be quite beneficial in helping to alleviate those pressures. I'm aware of a surf therapy initiative that went on in order to basically provide an outlet for veterans that were suffering with PTSD, and it was kind of really positively had a really positive outcome, and those kind of practices I think could be really like beneficial going forward. How you might put this into some sort of like policy, I'm not too sure, but I think just like the idea of blue health and kind of that like social prescribing of like access to blue and green ecosystems as a way of kind of alleviating those other kind of issues is really, really important. And yeah, I thought it was really cool to see.
Thank you. Would you mind popping a link to the website where you work as well on? Because obviously access to blue spaces isn't necessarily as easy to achieve. You can't just pop a blue space in an urban environment necessarily, where you might be able to put some green space. So online access as well, I think is really important to consider as well. Jenna, would you like to go to the next one? We're trying to keep like 10 minutes roughly per recommendation.
All right, sweet, thank you. The next outcome we wanted to focus on was no plastic pollution. So this is my area, and I get very worked up about it. But we know that there's like lots of issues associated with plastic pollution, and also it feeds back into the issue of circularity, where it's the easier it is to pollute and the easier it is to throw away, the more consumption there is, and that comes from ultimately fossil fuels. And even though bioplastics are being implemented in some areas, they still have to be processed to be degraded. So it is a matter of trying to stop it at the stem rather than focusing on recycling and reusing. Like we may as well try to narrow down the bottleneck of the stream of plastic as much as we can. And one council that we were inspired by through this research was Glasgow City Council, who has actually made a commitment to ban unnecessary plastic by 2030. And unnecessary plastic is a key word there because some plastics you can't avoid. For example, in hospital use, like it's a matter of like sanitization and safety that we have to use some plastics. I think it's important to ban plastics as much as we can in other sectors so we can preserve their use and their necessity in areas where they're actually needed. And then if commitments like these ones are made throughout other councils, then there would be a push in policy to support the delivery of these strategies. One thing I'm going to talk about, sorry, one thing I'm going to talk about with regards to plastic pollution in particular is how we can implement this idea through the use of schools and through the influence of schools. These are spaces where the public organizations, where councils have more control over, for example, than say businesses. They can influence them more. And by banning plastics in schools, you're also setting an example for younger generations that they're going to carry up with their habits as they grow older. And we know that change through influencing young generations also works very well. Like, for example, the seatbelt strategy that came out a few decades ago of like teaching in schools that seatbelts have to be worn. Kids will go home and tell their parents that. And if we try to do this with plastics, then show them that plastics are necessary, then it might help in future generations to kind of acclimatize to a new world where we don't rely on the plastics as much. There would also be incentives through the council for businesses to try to prioritize sustainable materials, not throughout just their business use, but also through their procurement. Encouraging businesses to rethink the way they work their material consumption. Again, going back to the stem of unlearning our requirement and our dependency on plastics, and finding other options.
Yeah.
I think for council,
Sorry.
I know, go for it. You can.
No, let's
feel free.
Let's hear the council side, and then we'll go to comments.
The council side is essentially to encourage. So council actions that could be taken is to essentially encourage what I've just said: businesses and schools and communities to sign pledges to cut out unnecessary single-use plastics, and ultimately eliminate them across UK councils, which I think could be possible. Also, allowing while we still do have plastics in our communities, ensure as much as we can that their management post-use is properly taken care of. So making bins and recycling sites very accessible, so we try to avoid littering, and then implementing designs such as water refill schemes, so people are more encouraged to use their own plastics over and over again, or use their own sustainable alternatives, rather than having to go out into the world and rely on a society where plastics are the standard.
Yeah. I guess then the question coming from that recommendation is, obviously at business level, at local authority, public and organisational level, what barriers or suggestions do you think we could make to councils to accelerate the widespread removal of plastics from our processes, lives, lifestyles, consumption?
I think one incentive we could do to kind of achieve that acceleration is subsidize the research and the development of alternatives. So provide councils and businesses with the tools they need to establish a different routine. Because in reality, one of the reasons why we use plastic so often is because they are so accessible, they're so convenient, and in order to phase them out of our society, we're going to have to provide people the tools to use other materials, because right now it's not the standard, and not everyone knows how to even source other materials, let alone use them and manage them properly. So I think that's going to be a big thing, is providing the research and knowledge to be able to make the switch, and the money as well.
Cool. Yeah.
So through subsidies.
Huge. Well, it's a systems change question. I guess, does anyone on the panel have comments to make about impacts of plastics or change? Yeah, Tony?
Yeah, just a quick thought. I'd really like to support what you said right at the beginning. Plastics, I think, are really just a symptom of the kind of time-limited approach that we have for a kind of consumer growth-based society. I think the plastics issue here is probably more of an indication rather than a issue in its own right. It's an indication of a much bigger problem. Having said that, probably what you're proposing sounds very good, but actually, I wouldn't like it to become an end in itself. We've solved plastics, so therefore everything's okay. It's not like that. It's part of a consumer-based society which is producing more and more waste. I also support your idea about the way to address this is to stop the stuff going in at the front rather than coming out at the end. So yes, recycling is important, but alternatives and different approaches, biodegradable systems and so on, that's more important. So actually stopping the plastic being formed in the first place is more important than trying to recycle it afterwards, although that's important as well. So I support what you're doing here, but I think the kind of frame that we see it within it's an issue which indicates a bigger problem.
Yeah, I think we could write that into our recommendation. That's a very interesting point. Symptomatic rather than the issue in itself.
Is that something I can pick up a bit, Tash?
Yeah,
in terms
please.
of Tony's point there. I mean, I think the national park's got a relatively small estate. I mean, we've got sites like the Seven Sisters Country Park. It's very popular with the public. We have a plastic-free offer there in terms of cafe catering. So we try and do our bit as an organisation. But I think that whole behaviour change, that wider sustainability element that Tony reflected on there, we are trying to promote a wider business sustainability standard with SMEs and rural businesses through our South Downs branding. which is sort of suggesting to businesses they're on a sustainability journey. Part of that might be they consider their business, particularly if it's a tourism business, they try and make their offer, if you like, plastic free, and they start to think about those wider sustainability issues, because they're running a business within a national park. So we need to demonstrate what a low carbon future looks like, what a highly sustainable visit could be, how people can get around the park with sustainable transport. So I think I agree with Tony. Plastics is a really important issue, but it's part of that wider sustainability discussion that we need to have with businesses and to affect behaviour change and make the case to the wider public.
Maybe I'll just finish this one on like a bit of a reflection from the oceans as well. I think like plastic pollution in the ocean is an issue that everybody knows about, is aware of. Our ocean generation was actually initially a plastic ocean, and our NGO was formed as a result of the documentary that was released. Our founder Jo Ruxton has spent her life advocating for plastic action on plastic, and I'd like to pick up what you said about education as well, because I think that's it's the issue with plastic. As if I just echo what Tony and Chris both have said as well, it is obviously part of that bigger, larger scale problem, and I think a lot of onus is often put on the consumer. In order for that to be successful, the educational programs are really, really important. That 5R approach, rethink, reduce, refuse, reuse, and recycle, is something that kind of needs to be bred into kind of everyday knowledge, like the seatbelt analogy that you gave there. But I also think, like you say, the pressure should really be on the producers as well, and kind of tackling that issue, and kind of aiming for a more like circular approach. I also wanted to highlight the deposit return scheme that I think, I'm not sure which specific countries in Europe have, but it's like basically there's an extra tax on if you buy an item in a plastic bottle, and then you can basically return it to your local supermarket and get that money back. And I think as a tangible kind of solution from a consumer point of view, that's like an interesting one. But I agree with my other panelists. It's a really large issue that we are facing, unfortunately.
Yeah, agreed. And I guess we're coming back to this whole issue of symptom of a larger issue, but one that people understand is an issue. And often when people think about sustainability who aren't already in the space, that is sort of the first thing that people talk about is waste. So I feel like maybe it's an easy one to get people to understand, and as like a route into other sustainability conversations. We've got 15 minutes left, so maybe we can go to questions, and if no one's got any questions they want to specifically bring, then we could come back to another recommendation.
I think there's a question from Nicola in the chat.
My bad. Can councils pressurise, so to the panel, can councils pressurise their local shops and supermarkets to change the amount of plastics used? I guess, Chris, what sort of capacity do you have to put pressure on from a local authority perspective?
I think the national park doesn't have a great deal of power to compel in this area. We're kind of effectively a single-use local authority in terms of our focus is on landscape, nature conservation, and cultural heritage. But we do recognise our role around climate change, particularly, and this sort of influence around behaviour change that we have. We can exert influence beyond our boundary because the national parks is a strong brand. We're not quite like the US parks. I think they are ahead of us on this. We do look at US Canadian parks. There is an international community that we're part of here. I think there is sort of best practice out there that we're always seeking to learn from. But I think, we do rely on exerting influence through our partnerships. So working with the businesses and rural communities that are within the park, residents and visitors, and just sort of engaging with them and getting them to understand this is a special place. These are particularly around climate change and nature recovery, these are areas where we really need to focus on it happening, and there are a lot of opportunities around that. But we do rely really on that influencing with, if you like, soft influencing.
That makes sense. And we were actually just talking about in the last session the limits of local government capacity to make definitive change, often around planning laws or how centralised our government system is in the UK. Ben's put a good question in the chat, which I'd love to hear comments on. Neve, do you want to go before I ask it? Do you want to speak before I ask it?
Well, yeah, I'll go first because I'm young and Ben isn't, so I get priority as this is youth led. No, it's a question actually to Gemma. Just so in our previous panel, because it was covering food, we did kind of talk a lot about regenerative sort of land practices. I was just wondering if like any of your knowledge kind of as a marine biologist, kind of if you can, I don't know, share any knowledge on how we can actually regenerate our oceans, because actually I think that's a topic that doesn't get spoken about quite a lot.
Yeah, I would love to. That was one thing I did pick up on the regenerative land practices kind of recommendation. Just the mention of oceans. We are an island nation, and I think like our perspective of the oceans needs to be like more integrated into how we kind of think of the food systems and all of that kind of other stuff. And I think the best way to kind of regeneratively like farm the ocean is to just kind of leave bits alone. Marine protected areas is basically what I'm getting at. There's been loads of studies done and evidence. I actually worked in the Philippines before I started this job, and I worked in implementing marine protected areas that were initially really opposed by fishermen, because it's like, well, you're taking away the areas that we can fish. And then actually what happens is that the areas of the ocean that are protected from fishing, the fish rapidly grow in numbers. And then there's a spillover effect into the surrounding areas where we are allowed to fish, which improves the fish stocks, it improves the health of the environment that's protected, and just makes the whole process more sustainable. And I think that is one of the key ways in which we can really support our kind of ocean food relationship, is to kind of, yeah, make sure we're considering that, and also the fishing method like practices as well. Things like bottom trawling are far more destructive to the ecosystem, because it quite literally scrapes the entire bottom of the ocean floor away. So all of the other sedentary animals and animals that are living there are destroyed. Whereas if you've got like nets on like bigger shoaling fishes, they tend to be like a little more sustainable. But obviously like it's a whole thing to get into. But I think, yeah, when we're talking about regenerative like agriculture, I think marine protected areas and the 30 by 30 initiative and beyond, I think is a really important stepping stone to help us fish our oceans more sustainably.
Yeah, Tony and then Jenna.
I think Jenna was first, actually.
Oh, sorry, I'm not keeping track. Please.
Thank you. I just I just put in a point when it comes to the regeneration of ocean habitats and ocean environments. Is one of the issues that we have when it comes to proving the effectiveness of proving the effectiveness of sustainability policies, is that sometimes when you try to implement like MPAs, for example, there was in 2019 I worked on a project trying to prove the effectiveness of MPAs along the Sussex coast to Selsey Bell. And when it comes to us recommending councils to protect these environments, we have to stress that there is inherent value in protecting nature, because in this one example, a project was given 5 years to prove the fact that if you don't trawl, the benthic environment thrives. And 5 years is not necessarily long enough for a marine environment to recover from years and years of benthic trawling. And we were desperately trying to prove the fact that, look, there's a kelp bed here regrowing. And we saw some variety and wildlife here, like please don't take away this protection just because in the 5 years you've given, we have improved that it's a good enough regeneration of land, of like land use, sorry, regeneration of the land to prove that the protection helps. So I think there is a matter of not only implementing protection and trying to achieve these regenerations of land, but also just allowing, like leaving it alone, like saying this is an MPA and we don't have to prove to you that we're doing good because there's already enough research saying that if you have MPAs, it helps with overspill, fishing, and that kind of stuff. So that's one point I think I'd like to make, is that not only to implement protective practices, but also just trust that they're going to do their job.
Yeah.
I was just going to say more or less the same thing. Actually, we've got some fantastic examples off the Sussex coast, as we know, with the kelp restoration project. Also further away in the Lyme Bay area, where scallop dredging has been stopped, and as a result, scallop dredging has improved, or scallop harvesting has improved around the edge of those areas. And I think really the point, leave things alone, allow space, and nature will rebound is a good thing. Totally agree with the point about allowing time. I think what we're seeing off of the Sussex coast is the ecosystem is recovering quicker than we expected. In other places, like the Newfoundland cod industry, it hadn't recovered since 1996. So you actually can end up with quite devastated areas that take a long time to recover.
So I suppose the policy recommendation should be not putting human expectations or time limits on nature recovery. We can definitely build that recommendation in.
It's the intrinsic value that somebody mentioned as well, which is very important. Nature doesn't have to justify itself in terms of its use to humans, important though it is. There's a layer above that.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And actually, in the afternoon session, we're going to be exploring the sort of how interwoven nature's value is to everything that we do. So health and equity, especially, that we've touched on already. We've got 5 more minutes, so maybe we could just do either another question or another recommendation, but like a quick one. Yeah.
If just a couple of things. So I read through the recommendations, and some of the nature-based ones and the regenerative agriculture ones were very interesting, and I'd like to support some of the things that have been said in there about. I think it's important to actually get a reasonable description about what we mean by regenerative agriculture. That's going to be helpful in all sorts of ways. I was also thinking that maybe actually you could perhaps demand more in some of your recommendations and aim to cut deeper. For example, with when it comes to community gardening, very strongly agree with that. How about using our current approach to allotment, for example? One target could be to reduce the waiting list for allotment to less than 3 months. We're entitled to allotment, and they could actually form the basis of community type agriculture. They're an enormous waiting list because they're just not provided. So that would be a really harsh target you could put in there. Reduce the allotment waiting list to less than 3 or 6 months or something. There's things like that. So if you were thinking about how to look at the nature recovery and regenerative agriculture side of things, I wouldn't be shy about demanding more.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
I think that thank you, Tony. That was a good insight on it. I think Ben had a question about microplastics. I'd be quite keen to answer if that's all right. He asked in the chat, are the health impacts of microplastic changing people's views? I think that was with regards to the plastics, plastic pollution outcome. I work in the field of marine microplastics, and I think that when it comes to changing people's views regarding health impacts, there's a lot more of a focus on remediation techniques as opposed to stopping the stopping the flow of plastics, because a lot of the issue of the health impacts of microplastics is legacy plastics that already exist in the environment. Once they're there, it's very hard to remove them. And even though there's some new research coming out next year, proving that if you stop the input of microplastics into marine environments, there will be reductions in the quantities of microplastics in food webs. So as a result, we'll hopefully be ingesting less on stopping the amalgamation of microplastics throughout the food webs. But when it comes to change people's views, I think that it is not as powerful as it should be with regards to stopping them, but more of like a kind of panic, how do we stop ingesting them? And that's where projects such as the Ocean Cleanup come in, where they're trying to implement large-scale removal of microplastics from marine environments to stop them from getting into food webs, to stop other animals and humans from ingesting them. But I don't think they're talked about enough.
Could you share the link in the chat? So I'd love to.
Yes, I'll get up the link for Ocean. The Ocean Cleanup, they're a really good company. They're very that I know that there are quite a few. There's quite a lot of suggestion that some companies might not be as honest as they could be with regards to sustainability, but I really like them because they're very honest about their shortcomings and they're very keen to improve whenever they can. So they're not, they're a very honest sustainability company, which is quite good. I'll just get the link for it.
Sick, thank you. Gemma, do you have anything coming from an NGO perspective that you'd like to ask of councils, especially coastal councils?
I think we've kind of covered a lot of it in this session. To be honest, I think potentially kind of support for those sort of community-led projects. Going back to the topic of like nature-based solutions and kind of reforestation, and there's also kind of the seagrass project that was run by the WWF and Sky Ocean and the Dale Bay, southern Wales. And that replanted 20,000 meters squared of seagrass and was like a community-led project and was like really, really well received. And seagrass, if you didn't know already, actually stores twice as much carbon as terrestrial forests. So they're really, really important carbon sequesters. And so I think from an NGO perspective, this is the kind of thing that we really like to see, like those community kind of bottom-up projects, but maybe support for those projects so that we can then kind of turn bottom-up, like combine bottom-up and top-down action into hopefully like more successful going forward.
Okay, oh yeah, that sounds good. I think what we're getting across the board actually is people saying we want more integrated systems, bringing in community business and councils to cooperate and collaborate together, so including bottom-up work, but directly asking them to sort of prioritize this and put direct efforts to support these groups would be, we could definitely weave that into our recommendations. It is 12:46, so it's actually 1 minute over the time that I said it was going to be. So I'm just going to say thank you to everyone on the panel and to everyone for joining and listening.